Good evening, everybody. You're very welcome to this evening's talk, which is on the care and conservation of historic graveyards. I'd like to welcome our speaker this evening, Ian Doyle. Ian is an archaeologist and he's the head of conservation at the Heritage Council. So we're very lucky to have Ian with us this evening. Ian, thanks very much for joining us tonight. I'll hand straight over to you. Take it away.
Okay, thanks, Lorna. Good evening, Bernadette, Mary, Nolene, Eric, Tommy, Seamus, Marion, Mara, Patricia, and Pauline. I don't think I've left anybody out, but I see Antoinette is joining us as well. Ian, I'm just going to make your pictures disappear now so I can show you some slides. I work for the Heritage Council, and we are probably best known to community groups like yourselves, the Length and Breadth in Ireland, as a grant giving body. Now, we do other things as well. We run Heritage Week, Heritage in Schools scheme, and we're formally set up to provide policy advice to the Minister. We do a few other things as well. But because we do grants, we do community grants, and I'll come to that in a minute, because we have a grant call out at the moment. The closing date is the 16th of February. We get a lot of projects for graveyards, historic graveyards, and they keep coming in year after year after year, and there's some brilliant projects there. And I have to say, I actually enjoy them. I don't get to visit as many of them as I'd like to, but it's lovely to go and visit a group and just to see the kind of energy and enthusiasm that they have for a place. And if you're sitting in a desk, as an archaeologist now, I excavate piles of paper, I'm afraid. Getting out and meeting people and seeing that kind of energy, it's brilliant. It's like a tonic. Just before we go any further, I better say I have a bit of a cold, so I might sound a little bunged up and I might cough and splutter a bit, but I don't think the broadband is that good, so I don't think I pose any threat to you. In terms of archaeology in Ireland today, and the kind of archaeology that gets done through these projects, it's nothing like this. And I suppose I really put this here as a kind of a straw man or a straw person. Why is this wrong? Well, I suppose the first thing, the kind of projects we fund, it wouldn't be just one person. There'd be a whole team of people. There'd be a community. It takes a community to deliver a really good project. The person in this is as likely to be to be a woman, as this Lego man, I think it is anyway. And we certainly don't find treasure or encourage looking for treasure or disturbing skeletons. But I suppose the one thing that is accurate there is the camera and I suppose the magnifying glass. We like things to be recorded and a record made. And that always helps, because the kind of places we're going to talk about tonight are incredibly important and incredibly significant in terms of heritage. So much so that a few years ago, we produced this booklet. It's called The Guidance for the Care, Conservation and Recording of Historic Graveyards, because there wasn't really anything that was filling the gap at that time. I think we did it about 10 years ago. And we were really trying to show people that up here in the top left, some of the stuff that's on gravestones, some of the imagery, some of the folk art, in the bottom left as well, the image of the moon, is really significant. It's really important. That these are important pieces of folk art and important pieces of heritage. But I suppose in a way, communities knew that years before, because we always saw an interest in community heritage graveyard projects. And really what this book does, and you'll find it, I'll show you the link later on, it's on heritagecouncil.ie where you can download it for free. It talks about the National Monuments Act, because most of these places are protected under the National Monuments legislation. And if it is, it means it's on the record of monuments and places. And I'll show you that in a moment. You can find all of that, maybe you all know about this, on an amazing website called archaeology.ie, and I'll show you some slides of that. The other thing we might talk a little bit about is ownership. The ownership of historic graveyards can be a bit of a rabbit hole, but ownership is really important. They're generally owned by local authorities, but there are ways of checking that. If you're planning on carrying out works, you have to notify, if it's on the record of monuments and places, and indeed it's good practice anyway, you have to notify the National Monument Service, and you'll find out all of that on archaeology.ie and in this booklet as well. The role of the Heritage Council then is, if you want to do a project, have a look at our grant scheme, Community Heritage Grant Scheme. That's open at the moment until the 16th of February, and you might get some ideas. The other thing I'll say, and I'll come back to this as well later on, is talk to your heritage officer. We have a heritage officer now in every county in Ireland. It wasn't always this way, but that's something brilliant now. Two other key ingredients for graveyard conservation projects, maybe even church masonry projects, is to have a plan. A plan. Sometimes people would say, "Oh no, not another plan." Plan just starts you off in the right direction, and it brings people together. And then a conservation consultant is really good, really important. It might be somebody to help you record memorials. It might be somebody to advise you on the biodiversity. It might be somebody to advise you on how to stop a church roof from falling down. But we'll cover a little bit of that as we go through it. So they're the kind of key things I'm going to talk about. And just as well as that, maybe why these places are important. Now, have any of you heard of the Commissioners of Church Temporalities in Ireland? Essentially, it's a big long list, this one. And it's burial boards in the several sanitary districts in Ireland, and it was compiled about on the foot of the Irish Church Act in 1869, right up to 1878. Some of you may know this. And I suppose the reason I put the cross up in Drumcliff is to show that, as you all know, these are really ancient, old, historic places. So Drumcliff with that high cross, that's a Columban monastery, a really important site. Going right back to the late 6th, early 7th century. And when the Church of Ireland, the old Anglican Church of Ireland, which until the late 19th century was the state church, when it was disestablished, they had properties everywhere. And the government set up a commission to figure out what to do with all its church sites. So what it does is there's a couple of appendices. There's the ones that stayed with the church. There's the ones that went to the national state, as it was then. So say places like the Rock of Cashel, the really key places. Or there were thousands of little sites that went to what were then called sanitary districts. And they were essentially the ancestors of local government, county councils. So if somebody was to ring me asking about doing a church conservation project, and one of the first things they always say is, I don't know who owns this, or I've talked to the county council and they don't know who owns this church site. I'd always direct them to this. Now, I'm struggling to find it online this afternoon, but if you look hard enough, you'll possibly find it. If you Google the Commissioners of Church Temporalities in Ireland, burial boards and sanitary districts, you'll find it. Now, it's a bit of a nightmare to find because everything is done under various unions, which were local authority divisions at the time. So it's not done by counties. It's done by various unions. So there's Ballina Union in that page. That's Ballina, obviously County Mayo. So you see Killala written there. There's Ballinasloe, Ballinrobe, also in Mayo. And when you find a property in that list in Appendix 7, it means the local authority owns it, whether they realise it or not. And that's always a good place to start in your conversation with your heritage officer. Now, do you remember I showed you that slide of the guidelines we published? This one. Well, we published that about 10 years ago. And to our credit or otherwise, at the time we said, don't buy expensive lawnmowers. They'll cost you money. We said, put a goat or some sheep in, if you can, into an historic cemetery. If you want to reduce the vegetation so you can see what's there. Things have changed hugely since then. And we now have an all-Ireland pollinator plan. So we really need to update that guidance. That's something I hope we'll get around to. But if you go through, this website, pollinators.ie, you'll see all kinds of amazing actions to encourage biodiversity within churches and graveyards. So there's just a selection of them. Protect any native hedgerows, cut grass as normal, but let the dandelions bloom. The bees like them. Create a long flowering wildlife meadow. Plant pollinator-friendly trees and shrubs. Plant bulbs for pollinators. Provide nesting areas for bumblebees. There's a lot you can do. So I suppose really what I'm saying is things have moved on a little bit. It's not just all about recording monuments and stopping buildings from falling down. And there's also another website, God's Acre, where they have, I think it's a UK site, they have the most amazing videos on how to manage YouTube type videos, or the kind of format, how to manage really practical stuff, how to manage wildflower meadows, and tips to make them develop. Now, this is a key one. I'm sure maybe you all know this. This is a website called archaeology.ie. So I was looking, I knew Lorna works in the Museum of Country Life. So this site is just down the road in Turlock. It's a round tower, an early church site, just on the side of the road. I think Castlebar is just, the Museum of Country Life is just off the bottom of the screen. And we gave a grant to this group last year, yeah, to do works on the graveyard boundary wall. But what it is you've got mapping. You can take your pick over here on the right of the various forms of maps. And you can go, you can see, is it recorded? What's its number in terms of the record of monuments and places? Just checking on time. We're doing okay, yeah. And that's really important way of finding out, is it recorded? Is it covered under the National Monuments Act? The chances are it is. But that will give you a number and will give you a little history of it as well. But you can also do other wonderful things, because you can, using the base map gallery tab here, just this box here, you can move back to see what it was like on the 1840 first edition Ordnance Survey map. And what's really obvious about this is the big change is you can see this circular enclosure here the whole way around it. Also a very nice ring fort here, which is still there. But you can see this circular ecclesiastical enclosure around the site here. The fact that it has a round tower suggests it's quite an important place as well. But I'm drifting a little bit off church sites now, because I want to show you something. If you're looking at Google Earth, don't know if any of you use this, it's a brilliant tool. So there's an image of a hill fort in County Kilkenny, and you can see a central enclosure here. And with the eye of faith, you can just about see another enclosure here. Something like that. Now the forestry is encroached upon it over here a little bit. But there's a thing in Google Earth called the time slider, where if you go to this thing, it's up in the top menu bar, you can go back. So this is imagery from 2005, and the light is just different. So you can make out this outer enclosure far easier. And here you can see it before the plantation got established. So sometimes you'll see different things just by looking at different photographs. And I suppose the key point is this is all free. And if you're looking for or looking at sites in your neighborhood, if you're involved in a project, it's good to know all these sites and see them. And most communities would. There's always somebody that's good picking up and looking through this kind of stuff. Yeah, what are we next? Yeah. Now remember I mentioned the circular enclosure. Well, as the expression goes, here's one I made earlier. So this is Clonus in Monaghan, done by an illustrator called Philip Armstrong. It's part of a Monaghan County Council, Heritage Council funded project. And these were to go on interpretive signs. So this is probably the site around 1100 or 1150. What you can see is another church being built here, but an inner enclosure here, another church here, the round tower, a little tomb or mausoleum here with a high cross. You can see this inner enclosure, and the outer enclosure was probably formed by this bank here, or this ditch. And you can see houses associated with it as well. So I suppose the point is, when you see monuments today with an enclosure like this, there can also be archaeology outside of them. So we have to be careful. And I'll show you some slides or some geophysics on it at the moment. There's another one. This is in a scheme, also in County Monaghan, funded through the same project. What I like about this one is to put in a mill. You often got mills associated with sites like this. So again, you can see the idea of an outer enclosure, an inner enclosure, and all of the various churches and the community here doing their thing. So that's good. What do other sites like this look like? Well, there's Armagh. Now this is probably the other end of the scale altogether. Look at this. See the curve? The inner enclosure. I don't know if you can see my cursor. And then there's another one out here. I think this is Scotch Street. So they're fossilized in the street pattern. And that's the series of early medieval enclosures that we also saw here at Turlock. Why is this important? Well, they're quite early. This is another site I was looking at a while ago. Do you remember in the 1970s, Ireland had a great idea. There was a nuclear power station at Carnsore Point in County Wexford. It's a granite headland. And there was a little church site there. What do you see? Only our friend, the circular enclosure, but it was excavated. Now, the power station was obviously never built. It's a wind farm now. Oh, yeah, I've lost the slide somewhere. But anyway, the point is, when it was excavated, there was an early church found underneath. I think I've skipped ahead on that now. Let me see, can I find that? Yeah, there it is. Look, excavated in 1975. This is it now. A suggestion with Saint 4, and most of these sites have a suggestion with a saint. And the key is to try and figure out when the pattern or feast day is at these sites, and try see is there a saint's holy day. So there's a tenuous connection between Saint Beccan of 4 with this site and the date of the pattern here. There we go, 20th of June. 3 phases of activity. The smallest was a really small timber oratory, 2.25 by 1.5, with underlying burials. So this scale bar here is about 1.5 meters. So what's that, about 5 or 6 feet? So that's the size of this little church. So it's a wonder that it survived here at all under this later stone church. So I suppose really what I'm saying here is that these places have a really important history or trajectory. They're really important heritage places and they have a lot of values. So I suppose what I'm talking about at the moment is probably more archaeological, but they have other values as well. I'm going back here now. So you get all kinds of amazing and interesting kind of heritage miscellanea or structures and monuments. So this, for example, is a 19th century pyramidal obelisk in Magdalen's graveyard in Naas. And this group, called the Follies Trust, a local community, the county council, started a conservation project. They thought this building was just so unique. So they did some masonry repairs and stonework, and they also fixed, with some help from the Heritage Council, the cast iron or wrought iron doorway. And there's some official from the local authority cutting a ribbon, and look, they're all laughing and having some fun. And even the kids have a row. Now, this one, I wonder, does anybody know what this is? I don't know if you can answer me, but you see these outside on boundary walls in some churches, and it's not just the style. See the way the wall lowers down beside the gate? It's a coffin rest. So when coffin was being carried in, and these are before the kind of days when the mechanized or the motorized hearse would drive in, it would allow people to walk in the gate and then move to the other side of the wall to lift it. So you see them. You see them in a lot of sites. Then it doubles up as a style as well. And then this is just a bluebell medal, because we've come to see things like that to be far more important. That it's not just something you go at with a strimmer. That it's a value in its own right in a graveyard that we should be trying to care, conserve, and manage, and a lot of groups are. we cover that. Or here's another one just up the road from Carnsort. This is Ferns in County Wexford, where the name of the Diocese of Ferns is a place where it gets its name from. Again, a lot of archaeology. This is a much shaped 19th century church. There are earlier medieval buildings. This is an early 12th century church. It's probably modelled on Cormac's Cathedral at Cashel. This seems to have been built as a royal burial church for Dermot MacMurrough. You remember him. Now, whether he was ever buried in it or not, we don't know. So associated with the MacMurrough Kinsale dynasty, numerous cross fragments, cathedral, 19th century, heavily modified. But this is it from the air, and what you have is this big open field here with graves here and here. And I'm going to talk a little bit about geophysics. Now that probably looks like a mess, but you remember I talked about those two enclosures. Well, lo and behold, when the Discovery Programme, which is a state archaeological research institute, was carrying out some survey work here under the direction of Dr. Doyle in 2015, they noticed, don't know if you can see this, see the line coming across here? That's an enclosure, like the ones I showed you earlier in Monaghan and other places. And then there's another one here. So these things all exist under the ground. So what we tend to say to people when they're doing projects like this is try not to dig. Now, I know that sounds counterintuitive when you have a community that's been burying people for generations there. I think what we'd really say is in places like this, don't dig unless it's for a burial. Don't dig unless you absolutely have to. So don't level humps and bumps. And this is very much the National Monuments Service's view as well. Level things up. Raise the ground up rather than seeking to level, because there are all kinds of archaeological deposits. Now, this is probably the exceptional mad case, but there are features like this in ecclesiastical sites all around the country. Now, the other thing we've been doing in terms of grants is we've been funding graveyard surveys. A couple of years ago, we cottoned on to the fact that not only are these gravestones incredibly fine works of art, you can see the kind of folk carving. In fact, one of my favorites is there's a couple of gravestones in Glendalough, and they're scenes of the crucifixion of our Lord's Passion. And instead of the 3 Roman soldiers being there, what you have is you have a couple of redcoats. So that was what the people in that kind of folk art depiction saw as the equivalent of Roman soldiers. Or maybe they were yeomen, but they have the peaked hats and they look like the muskets. So there was a little political nudge there, needle there as well. So when you start projects like this, there are all kinds of ways of doing it. There is a company, historicgraves.ie. They have a system and they train people to do this, and they're incredibly sociable activities. I called in to see one in Glendalough a few years ago, and everybody had a smile on their face, and they were taking plenty of tea breaks. You know, neighbours were meeting, and obscure and half-forgotten facts about families and people that were buried in a cemetery would be remembered and pointed out. So if you log on to historicgraves.ie, you'll see that all this mapping is really starting to add up, and it's become a really interesting genealogical database in its own right. In terms of some projects we've done over the years, this is a little bit of a favourite of mine. This is in County Waterford. And don't know if any of you know the road from Dungarvan up to Clonmel. When you start off, you're climbing the whole time, and you're going up through this kind of mountain pass between the Comras and can't remember the other mountain range, but it's a pass anyway. Here's this church, and the lady on the right, Nora White, Dr. Nora White, came to us a couple of years ago, and she said, the local community with her as well, and she said, this site is actually really important. It's not just a medieval church. There are a lot of old stone built into it. So just You see the photograph on the right, you see the gentleman with the walking stick with the orange hat. Just to the right of his head, you'll see a big long door lintel. It's an old stone. So it probably dates to the 5th, 6th centuries, and it's ohm writing, you know, that series of strokes on the edge of the stone that records generally the name of somebody and their tribal affiliation. The earliest form of writing in Ireland that we know of. And it's significant. It dates from the time of St. Patrick, to try and put it into that kind of context. So the problem with this church was in terrible condition. It was ready to fall down. So we helped them through the Heritage Council grant scheme with a plan. And they came back to us then with a mason and an archaeologist and a conservation consultant that just understood how to put walls back together. And lo and behold, they had a very good mason here, Tom Pollard. And over the space of about 5 or 6 years, by doing a gable at a time, or sometimes top of the gable, bottom of the gable the next year, they've managed to completely save this church. And we were there filming for it for Nationwide during the summer. It was a lovely day, with the Heritage Officer, Bernie, as well, Bernie Guest. And just the crack we had with the locals and the community, and the sense of pride that they had in it was, after probably a year and a half of COVID at that time, it was a lovely tonic. And it was, I always say that it was like, heritage was like glue, bringing people together. So there's Tom the Mason. Look, I kind of said all that. So funding from the Heritage Council, so Creative Ireland, and now they've recently got funding from the National Monument Service. There they are in the bottom right, lifting this old stone lintel back into place. This is the north wall of the church, which you can see from the scaffolding and the lifting, the chains. It's quite specialised, but these guys knew what they're at, and they worked with us and the National Monument Service, and they did an amazing job. Now, here's another one. What I like about this is it's a Heritage Week event, and look at the smiles. I don't think they're just smiling for the sake of, say, cheese. They were enjoying this project. This is Killishandra in County Cavan. This is a really interesting church. There's a medieval church there, the Church of the Rath. And then in the Jacobean period, the late 17th century, the building you see behind you was built. So it's a very early 17th century church with very early red brick vaults. And works were done on it about 20 years ago. But because of a couple of bad winters, bad weather, a mortar capping that had been put on the red brick vaults, and 17th century brick, it's handmade, probably not as well fired as today. It's good though. It was never meant to be exposed. And what was happening was the water, and you get a bit of freeze thaw action as well, was running down through it. And eventually the vault was going to collapse. So it needed a roof. And this group, the Tidy Towns group, and you can see the lady here in the back, the tall lady with the bag across, was the Heritage Officer, and Marie, I've forgotten her surname now, apologies. And she's the Heritage Officer in Cavan, and she just built a great relationship with this group and vice versa. And between Heritage Council funding, National Monument Service, architectural conservation funding, and forming a good partnership with a grade 1 architect, they managed to save this site. And this is the Heritage Week the Heritage Week event that they did. They dressed up and had a bit of fun. They also did some graveyard recording. And as of last year, they did some further works to a 19th century mausoleum at the far side of the church. Yeah, they had some good fun. They held open days on site. A brick making workshop, and that got the kids involved. Kind of hard to get kids involved in meetings about conservation plans and assessing tenders, but this caught fire. They all made bricks, and I don't know about the children where you are, but my kids love coming home hooked up, making stuff, and then they got to go back and see how their bricks turned out when they were fired. So they're continuing to do works and making a key difference, and it will feed into their Tidy Towns work in a really strong way. So that at the top is before they started. You can see the exposed red brick. That at the bottom after they finished. It's not what would have been there, but it's about ensuring that that church survives. And then the little hole in the zinc roof where you see the red brick is for the stub of a former chimney. Yeah, this is another site. I mentioned geophysics before. Occasionally we get groups come to us and they want to see what's under the ground. And this group is a participant in our Adopt a Monument scheme. This is the Malin Head Church, right up the very tip of Ireland in Malin Head. And it's a church site. And there they are having a meeting to hear about this geophysical survey. I think we supported them doing that last year. And what you have is you have a church here. And what they wanted to see was what's around it. And what it seemed to show is, think of that image I showed you of those reconstruction drawings from Monaghan. You know, those nice pictures. This is the kind of place people would think of putting a car park. But when they did their survey, I think it cost a couple of thousand. They were able to show that there were buildings here. So that's not something you want to do. Move the parking somewhere else. So the building wasn't on its own. So it's that point about, it's not just what you can see. It's not just about what's above ground. There's much more to it as well under the ground. So just come to the end now. We're coming up to the 35-minute mark. Are there useful sources out there? Yeah, of course they are. And what's been really good about all of this in the last 10 odd years or so is how much has become freely available online. So what have we got here? We've got what we call Adopt a Monument Guidance for Community Archaeology Projects published by the Heritage Council. The really helpful advice note published by the Department of, they've changed names. We call them the Department of Heritage. But you'll find those guidance documents on the Buildings of Ireland website, buildingsofireland.ie. You'll find this one about actions to help pollinators on the pollinators.ie website. That's the National Biodiversity Data Centre. And then you'll find other things on the Heritage Council website, stuff about Omestones. We got on so well with the Wicklow project, Wicklow and Waterford, Knockboy project. We decided we'd produce a little book on Omestones, just celebrate the discovery that we had there, where we found a particular Omestone that had been lost during the conservation works. And then there's that guidance as well. So you'll find that stuff there. Nearly there. The Heritage Council Community Heritage Grants deadline is the 16th of February next. And that's an online application process. So you log on and upload your documents. And we have 1.5 million for that fund this year to be spent nationally. And so you'll find all that on heritagecouncil.ie. And generally the kind of projects we see coming in are where there's a community and there might be somebody's mother or parent or grandfather buried under a dubious or precarious looking arch like this. And they're worried that there'll be an injury or somebody will be hurt when they're visiting if there's a gale. So a group comes together, and in the first instance, they might apply to us for a plan that sets out what's the protection on the site, is it important, and what needs to be done, and what are the various steps to do that. And there are steps that you have to jump through. They're not barriers, they're hurdles, because there are people that negotiate these things the whole time. So if you're going to do works like this, have a plan, let the National Monument Service know, talk to your heritage officer, things like that. So we tried to condense this into this graphic on the right, top tips for caring for your graveyard. So before you begin, talk to your local authority heritage officer, check the ownership, carefully consider what it is you want to do. Think about, do you need to do ground disturbance? Do you need to consult with the National Monument Service? And the answer is invariably yes, if you want to do anything. Make a plan. Things to avoid: excessive mowing and the use of herbicides. We tend not to like weed killer. It just wipes out everything. And you know what happens afterwards? Everything just grows back again. Don't remove ivy. This is an important one. A lot of groups think, oh, we'll take that ivy down. Sometimes what the ivy is doing is it's the last hope. It's the last thing that's holding masonry, loose masonry where the mortar might have washed out or the ivy might have eaten it. The ivy might be all that's keeping it together. So what we'd always say is only remove the ivy if you know you have the funding to carry out repointing and conservation works, because you could end up with a pile of rubble. We've seen that happen. This doesn't go on as much. It's used to no power washing, sandblasting, or chemical treatment of headstones. They're not made for that, and they don't need it. And do you know what? Most communities kind of moved away from that anyway. Masonry memorials, repairing them is fairly specialised. Boundary walls should be maintained with care, lime mortar, not blocking up things like stiles and coffin rests. Natural heritage, really important. If the dandelions bloom, watch out for bats. Only trim hedges and trees between September and March. Just watch the uprooted trees, because get advice before you're cutting them back, because if they come down, you could take a lot with them. And then we're just saying, have a look at this document, the guidance for the care, conservation and recording of graveyards. Oh yeah, now we're on to the last slide. What's coming up to 22. I had to do this webinar a while ago for people applying for Heritage Council grants. And I was trying to think, they're going to be hearing all kinds of stuff about graveyards and sites. What do they actually need? What are the key things to tell people that we've learned over the years of doing these grants? I think the first one is involve as many people as you can, whether it's your Tidy Towns group, the neighbours, problem shared is a problem solved, or half solved anyway. So involve as many people as you can. And there are various people with different skill sets out there as well. So somebody might be good at applying for grants. Somebody else might be good with fundraising. Other people might be good at just organising people or bringing them all together. So I think it takes a lot of people to make a good project, and a couple of different skill sets. Understand. So I think try to understand these places. Is it protected? Why is it significant? Who owns it? And just work all that out. Partnership. Talk to your heritage officer. If you're going to carry out works, let the National Monument Service know. And the other really good reason for partnership is it's easier to get money. It's easier to get grants when you can show that you're a united group and you're doing everything right. I mean, you've a good plan, so that all helps. So it's a good investment. People in place. What do I mean by that? The best heritage projects are about people who know their area and are keen and are interested in their area and their neighbourhood. I'm not trying to make a deep point here, but it's kind of hard when you see problems in towns and villages and rural areas of things like crime or traffic going too fast or people not having jobs. It can be hard to change all that, but you can actually make a difference, and you can do good work if you work with your neighbours and your people in your local place on projects like this. And the sense of achievement that you see on projects that are just getting on is incredible. And I suppose that just speaks to that point. Joy. If you're doing a Heritage Week event, bring the flasks, bring a few sandwiches, try organise something, an information evening. If you have somebody giving a lecture on what it is they've learned, what they've researched, what they've found, what they think you should do, you can do it via Zoom, or things are opening up now. You can try do something in the local community hall. That ability to meet and talk to people, we might have taken it for granted the last 2 years, shown just how important it is, and in terms of beating isolation as well. So finally, thank you, and I'll give you one more plug on the Heritage Council Community Grant Scheme, which is open until the 16th of February next. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ian. That was really, really interesting. I just want to open up the floor now if anyone has any questions for Ian while we have him.
Ian, Will there be notes here on this?
What are we doing, Lorna? Are we making this available?
The recording of this, it'll be for iCAN members, Seamus.
Yeah.
I haven't done any
And
notes.
if there's members of the Mayo genealogy group that you think would be interested, they can get in touch with me.
Okay.
I think up there, I didn't do any notes. I just did these slides. I think the key thing would be have a look at the care and conservation and recording of graveyards publication. That won't put you too far wrong.
And I know exactly where that is, so I can send a link out to you. While Ian was speaking as well, I was also trying to find the commissioners of church temporalities in Ireland.
It's a hard one to find.
Yeah, it's a horrible title, but I did find it in hard copy. You can buy it for about €25, but I will actually keep on looking to see, can I find it, because Ian, do you think it's actually available online somewhere?
I've never found it, but if anybody really, wants it, I can send a copy PDF to Lorna.
Oh, would you?
Brilliant.
I'm sure that would be handy, and I could, keep hold of that and give it to people as they need it. That would be wonderful, Ian. Thank you.
It's not the easiest document to use, but you just have to work your way through it.
Well, we love difficult documents. we like to get the looking glass out and be history detectives.
Okay.
Would anyone else? Oh, Tommy.
Could I just ask a question?
Nolene, I'll just come to you. Tommy just got in there before you. I'll come back to you. Tommy, did you have a question there? You might need to take off your mute.
Yeah, sorry, Nolene.
It's okay.
Just my question, I'm based in Delgany and we have an ancient church burial ground, it's called, in the middle of the village. We've been trying to find out the ownership of it for some time, and we've gone through every source that we can think of. And I'm sorry, I know you've gone over this briefly, but I didn't quite get what you said we should do. Is it that mentioned? Is that a document that you've just been talking about? We should try and get our hands on.
That's the first. That's a good starting point. That's a great question, Tommy. Did you talk to Deirdre Burns, the heritage officer?
Yes, she didn't know. Yeah.
Okay. There are a small number of sites that didn't end up anywhere.
Yeah.
They slipped through the net. But the first place to start would be that list. So I can send, it's a big document. I'll figure out a way to send it to Lorna.
Thanks very much. Okay, that's great. And it should be listed on there somewhere, you think? Our place.
There's a good chance. I have a feeling, now this could be going back a long time. We might have funded a report on that site many, many, many years ago.
Wow.
I'd have to have a look.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'd love to see that.
I could be mixing up somewhere else in Wicklow, but sometimes you have a little niggly feeling.
Yeah, it's an ancient one. There's a 9th century cross in there, for example. So
yeah.
Well, half of a 9th century cross. Okay.
Or drop me a line on it either.
Okay.
Lorna has my address.
Yeah, I'll
Thanks, Ian.
Touch,
Yes.
Tommy. Yeah, I'll make it.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Ian. Thanks, Lorna.
Thanks, Tommy. Nolene, over to you. You have a question for
I
Ian.
was wondering, is the Heritage Council interested in the old famine graveyards that are mentioned? They're just circled red on the old maps. But
Yeah.
are they being investigated?
Yeah, I know of one individual. For my sins, I chair a committee for the Royal Irish Academy, and it awarded a project to I've got an archaeologist called John Tierney last year. I haven't seen what he found to do just that, to try and map graveyards. I don't know what counties or what you're thinking of, but there is a kind of a growing interest in them. But I think as well as that, there's a kind of a growing feeling that while they might not always be protected, they're incredibly sensitive and incredibly important places. We probably have funded survey projects on some of them. I'm struggling to think of them at the moment. But if we got a grant application in from a community to have a look at one, and to see if they can make some sense of it and come up with a little plan for it, I think we'd be interested.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Thanks, Nolene. I'm sorry, I wasn't sure if
Sorry.
you're okay, Nolene.
Thank you. Yeah.
Oh, you're welcome. Sorry. I'm not sure, was Mary or Deirdre first who had the hands up? If you both ladies, if you want to take your...
Mary was
Deirdre, you
first.
Thanks, Deirdre. Mary, go ahead.
Okay. Hi guys. Ian, thanks a million. That was really, really, really brilliant presentation. It just kind of broke it down a bit as well. And we have been using, we're in Louisburgh Killeen in West Mayo, and we've been using the that fantastic booklet because it's just brilliant. The guidance for the care and conservation of recording, because we started a project with 3 cemeteries here in Louisburgh. There's 2 Catholic and 1 Church of Ireland, but it's just a brilliant reference to have. And the question I had was about a conservation consultant. Are those readily available? Is there a site you can go to and just find a list of names and phone numbers or emails or whatever?
I'm not allowed to recommend anybody.
Of course, yeah.
I think your heritage officer would be very good.
Okay.
Do you have any dealings with Deirdre in Mayo?
Yeah, we do indeed. Yeah.
Very good there. The other way would be the Institute of Archaeologists of Ireland has a register of its members. You could see who's in that part of Mayo or active in that part of Mayo.
Sure.
And there are people. Now it depends on what kind of a project it is. Are there masonry remains that need to be consolidated, or?
Yeah, there's an old ruins of a church there. Yeah.
Yeah.
An abbey. Yeah.
Yeah, Deirdre give you a good stare on that, I think.
Yeah, fair play. No, that's good. And the other thing, actually Deirdre, the other Deirdre that's here that reminded me of it in a text earlier on, was there was an old burial site back on the White Strand, back on the beach. And it was quite a prominent thing right up to, we were kids growing up in the 80s and the early 90s, but it was never protected. And unfortunately, it's basically gone. It's just the sand dunes now, and there's a few stones there. But it was recorded in our local parish magazine over the years, a few photos of it. It was like a pyramid almost. It was a huge mound of headstones and the remains, I mean, bones and skulls and everything. But there was a recording somewhere that, I'm not sure, was it Trinity or where the research students came from, had taken some artifacts from there and brought them for research. How would one go about even trying to find out where those artifacts went?
I think the first place I'd start would be I'd have a look at that website with the mapping, archaeology.ie.
Okay.
And just click into, I think if you go to the landing page, archaeology.ie, and then click on Archaeological Survey of Ireland, and you're looking for the historic environment viewer, and it may well be recorded. What's the townland name? Do you know?
Sorry?
You know the townland name?
It would be under Tallabone, I'd say. It's
That's not where Michael Biney writes from.
Yes, that's exactly, that's the beach he has done his 4 seasons from and everything. It's over on the right, and he actually wrote about it numerous times in the Irish Times and that as well. But yeah, he he has a headstone in his garden from it as well, because he was afraid that that it would all be washed out to sea. But the inscriptions are illegible on it. You can't even see it now. But it was a shame. Initially, it was thought that was actually a monastic site and that the land went out further and there was a monastery there, which probably could be right, because we have Kilgeever Abbey, which and Crowpatrick. So St. Patrick was supposed to have founded Kilgeever Abbey and then continued on out and whatever. So there possibly could be that there as well. But it's just it's heartbreaking now to go down and see, there's hardly anything left. But it would be interesting to find. I'll try that, the archaeological map and the Survey of Ireland, and see if there's anything recorded on it.
Yeah.
That's brilliant. Thanks a million. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks, Mary. Thank you. Deirdre.
Thanks, Lorna. Thanks, Ian. My question is similar to Nolene's. I'm interested in the Killeens, the children's burial grounds, and if there's any conservation or care happening for those.
Yes and no. They're sites that people tend to stay well clear of for obvious reasons, because they have such kind of a strong meaning. And sometimes they're much earlier sites as well. So I can think of a site near me in County Wexford where I was always fascinated with it as a child. It's supposed to be where the pikemen in 1798 are buried. but when you go into it, and it took me a while to cotton onto this, there's a big mound in one corner, and it's where the children from the local hospital were buried. People tend to stay pretty clear. Is anybody doing anything with them? We don't, because we're a grant giving body. We don't actually carry out work directly ourselves. But if we got an application from a community group that wanted to maybe look after the gate in, signage, acknowledge it, do some survey recording there, maybe a little event to try and bring it back to public consciousness, we'd be interested in it.
Oh, great. That's really interesting. Thank you.
Thanks, Deirdre. Thanks. Eric, you need to take your mute off.
Okay. Ian, you've spoken about the conservation and restoration of buildings then on that. We have Clare Abbey, an abbey of 1189, beautiful building under the care of OPW. But the graveyard within the abbey seems to be, it might be under the care of Clare County Council.
Yeah.
But the problem is there are gravestones, flat gravestones going back to 1692, but there are upright stones that in the last 2 years were badly vandalized or smashed by a crowd of thugs. Is there any possibility of getting money to repair those stones or do something with them? In most cases, the families would have died out. There's no burials in the graveyard now in Clare Abbey. But we just wouldn't have the funds or the expertise to even stick them back together, never mind replace them. And is there any way we could raise money?
Yeah, I've seen that done before. It's pretty specialized in that you drill a dowel, stainless steel dowel, and you join the broken pieces up. And when it's done, it can be done pretty well, but it is specialized. I'd say the first thing to do would be to talk to Congella Maguire, the heritage officer, because if the OPW owns the church, this isn't unusual. The county council can own the cemetery, and when you end up with that kind of split ownership, sometimes things fall between the stools.
Yeah, the OPW claims that they're responsible for the fabric of the abbey, but not the gravestones.
Yeah, they probably are. That's not unusual.
Yeah,
it's just the way properties through that whole disestablishment and the way the state worked and local government worked, the way it kind of evolved.
Yeah.
So I'd say you'd have to talk to the landowner, which is the county council, to make sure they're happy. If you applied to us for a grant to do that, we'd be looking for the permission of the county council and a method statement or guidance from somebody that knows what they would be at.
Yeah.
For the costing.
Yeah, the costings, yeah.
So I'd say talk to Congella and have a look at heritagecouncil.ie and you'll find the online grant system.
Yeah.
Oh, there I see Congella.
I'm here. No, I'd be very happy to support you, Eric, there. There is controversy about who owns what and in terms of the graveyard. So it's been disputed. But look, we'll work through it with you, Derek and Eric, and absolutely, it'd be great to make an application to do that. If Ian would support that, that'd be great. Yeah. So we can work on that.
Thanks, Congella, and thanks, Ian.
You have about 2 weeks, but look, there's work in it, but
yeah,
I would be lying to you otherwise. But it is possible, it is feasible.
Well, even if we came back next year, they're there for 300 years, so another year won't make much of a difference.
You know what? That's Eric. That's a really important point. I normally say that, and you all roll their eyes to heaven and work when I say it. The golden rule of conservation is make haste slowly.
Yeah.
And it's good practice.
Yeah.
Brilliant, thanks, Eric. Tommy, you want to come back in?
Sorry, I had to leave the room for a minute there and I may have missed this. Sorry, I had to take a call. Ian, and I think you were talking about as I came back in, the actual grant. We did apply for one. I'm just wondering if it's the same thing. It's to do with for example, tools in the burial ground and that sort of thing. Is that it?
No, I don't think we've ever funded tools.
No. What exactly is it? I'm sorry, I missed it.
What we fund normally would be if you want to get a plan or a report done to set out why is the site important?
Oh, okay, sorry. That's what the funding is for. Okay.
And then the following year. No, I'm just talking about churches and graveyards. There are all kinds of other projects that apply under the scheme as well. But what people would do then is they might come back to us to carry out actions.
Okay.
So,
okay. That's different. Okay, fine. Yeah, I'm thinking of something else completely. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
So that would be under the community grant scheme, Ian, wouldn't it? And Congela. And then you have the monuments, the building and monuments fund. All right.
There's also go on, Congela.
Yeah, the community monument scheme, isn't it?
Community monument scheme. Thanks, Congela. And that's different to the community grant scheme. They're two separate.
Yeah.
So
One
they
is from the
might
department.
both be relevant. Yeah, but Tommy, Deirdre would be the best person for you to talk about those.
Yeah, I have actually applied for this. I thought it was for the council. It must be for something else. I've already applied for this thing, so it must have been. Sorry, I'm just all over the place.
Well, I don't blame you, Tommy.
Beg your pardon?
Because there's so many grant schemes out there at the moment.
It's
very
confusing.
difficult
It's very hard to keep it all.
It is, and there is a lot of crossover. You know, different grant schemes do fund the same elements as well. So but I think once you have your application thought process, it's very helpful then for applying for other grant schemes.
We hate to miss out on grants because that's our only way of getting any income. We've no other way, like most places, of getting income. So it's essential that we apply for every grant, even if we don't get them, just to apply for them.
Yeah. We'll keep our fingers crossed for you, Tommy, that the grant you put in for.
You can send on a few bob as well. That would be good.
Right, I'll bear that in mind. Guys, I suppose we're just a few minutes before 8 o'clock. You know me, I like to start and finish on time.
Yes.
But just to say, as Ian did mention about the Adopt a Monument scheme, on the 17th of February, we've actually got Neil Jackman, who runs the scheme on behalf of the Heritage Council, coming in to talk to us that evening. So if you're really interested in this area, you know, I think you'll find Neil's talk really good as well. So I suppose just to wrap things up, thanks to you all for your attention, for your very thoughtful questions. And Ian, again, thanks very much for being with us here this evening. It's really enjoyable. Thanks very much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ian.
Great.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank
Great
you.
to see you all. Have a lovely evening and take care of
All right.
yourselves.
Thanks everybody.
Bye-bye, guys.
Bye.
Thanks, Lorna.